The gym was loud in the way serious gyms always are, not with music or chatter, but with effort. Iron clanged against iron, plates scraped the floor. Breathing was heavy, rhythmic, controlled. This wasn't a place built for comfort or image. It was built for strength, and everyone inside knew exactly why they were there. Late afternoon light cut through the high windows, catching dust in the air and outlining bodies mid-strain. Men trained here to move weight, to push limits, to prove something measurable. Bruce Lee stood near the far side of the room, barefoot, calm, almost out of place. He wasn't lifting heavy plates. He wasn't pacing between sets. He was observing, studying movement, posture, tension. His training clothes were simple, no belt, no insignia. Nothing that signaled authority in a room where authority was usually measured in numbers etched onto steel plates. Arnold Schwarzenegger was impossible to miss. Tall, broad, already carrying the presence of someone who dominated space without trying. His physique drew attention even among strong men. Thick chest, wide shoulders, arms that looked sculpted rather than trained. He moved with confidence born from repetition and validation. People watched him lift, they always did, not out of intimidation, but admiration. Arnold represented visible strength, undeniable, measurable, impressive. At some point between sets, Arnold noticed Bruce. Not because Bruce demanded attention, but because he didn't. Bruce wasn't watching Arnold lift the way others did. No awe, no comparison. Just quiet observation, like a mechanic watching an unfamiliar engine run. Arnold finished a set, racked the weight, wiped sweat from his face, and finally walked over. Curiosity, not hostility, but curiosity sharpened by ego, the way it often is among elite performers. "You train here?" Arnold asked. Bruce nodded. "Sometimes." Arnold looked him up and down, not disrespectfully but honestly. He saw the size difference immediately. He saw what everyone saw at first glance. Lighter frame, lean build, no mass advantage. In Arnold's world, physics mattered. Weight moved weight. Muscle moved muscle. That wasn't arrogance, it was experience. Bruce gestured toward a thick steel bar resting near a rack. No plates loaded, no visible challenge. "I'm testing something today," Bruce said. Arnold followed his gaze. "That?" He smiled slightly. "There's nothing on it." Bruce shook his head. "Not weight, structure." That was the first moment Arnold felt something unfamiliar. Not threat, but friction. The words didn't align with his framework. Strength was structure as far as he was concerned. Bone, muscle, leverage. You trained it by loading it. Bruce placed one end of the bar against the floor, angled upward. He wrapped his fingers around it, not fully gripping, not bracing himself the way lifters do. Just contact. Calm, measured. Arnold frowned. "You can't do that." Bruce didn't respond. He adjusted his stance slightly, not wider, not lower, just aligned. His breathing slowed. The room didn't quiet, but something in the space around them did. A few people nearby stopped what they were doing, not because they expected a spectacle, but because they sensed one was about to happen. Arnold crossed his arms, not mocking, certain. "That bar won't bend," he said. "It's solid steel." Bruce nodded. "I know." Seconds later, the room learned the difference between lifting weight and understanding force. Bruce didn't rush. That alone confused Arnold. In every strength demonstration Arnold had ever seen, there was preparation that looked like effort. Chalked hands, tightened jaws, visible tension before the attempt. Bruce did none of that. His shoulders stayed loose, his neck relaxed. His grip on the bar was firm but not clenched. It didn't look like he was about to fight the steel. It looked like he was about to speak to it. He inhaled slowly, not into his chest, but deep into his abdomen, expanding his core as if he were grounding himself rather than powering up. Then, without any dramatic movement, he applied force. Not suddenly, not explosively, progressively. The bar didn't move at first, and that moment reinforced Arnold's certainty. Steel had limits. Human bodies had clearer ones. Then the impossible happened quietly. The bar flexed. Not dramatically, Not like something snapped or failed. It bent just enough to be undeniable, a subtle curve where there had been none before. Enough that the light reflected differently along its length, enough that anyone watching could see the geometry of reality shift by a few unforgiving millimeters. Arnold uncrossed his arms. Bruce held the pressure for a brief moment, then released it gently, letting the bar settle back against the floor. No strain crossed his face, no victory. He hadn't won anything. He had simply completed a test. Around them, the gym had gone quiet in the way only serious people get quiet. No gasps, no shouting, just the sound of breathing stopping mid-cycle. A few men walked closer, eyes fixed on the bar, then on Bruce, then back again, trying to reconstruct what they'd just seen, using rules that no longer applied. Arnold stepped forward slowly. He crouched, ran his fingers along the bar, checking for tricks. No cracks, no weakened point, no pre-bend. He lifted it, tested the weight, the stiffness. It was exactly what it had been moments ago. "That doesn't make sense," Arnold said. Bruce smiled faintly, not amused, understanding. "You were trying to measure strength," Bruce said. "I wasn't." Arnold looked up. "Then what were you doing?" Bruce leaned the bar back into place, as if the demonstration were already over. "I was aligning force. When structure is correct, you don't fight resistance. You redirect it." Arnold stood there, the gears in his mind turning. His entire life had been built on progressive overload, adding weight, increasing resistance, forcing adaptation through visible stress. It worked. His body was proof. But what he had just seen didn't fit inside that model. There had been no visible exertion proportional to the result. "You're telling me this isn't strength?" Arnold asked. Bruce shook his head. "It is strength, just not the kind you can isolate." He gestured toward Arnold's chest, arms, shoulders, not dismissively, but precisely. "What you've built is extraordinary, but it's specialized. You're powerful when the problem matches the movement you trained. I train so that my body adapts to problems that don't announce themselves." Arnold was silent. For once, he wasn't the biggest presence in the room, not physically, but conceptually. He realized something uncomfortable. If that force had been applied to a human body instead of steel, there would have been no warning, no time to brace, no dramatic collision. Just result. "So if I tried that," Arnold said carefully, "I couldn't do it." Bruce met his eyes. "Not yet." That answer landed heavier than an insult ever could. Because it wasn't a dismissal, it was an invitation. Arnold didn't argue. That surprised the men watching even more than the bent steel. He had built a reputation on certainty, certainty in his training, his methods, his vision of what strength looked like. But he was also intelligent enough to recognize when something didn't fit inside the map he'd been using. He handed the bar back to the rack, slower now, as if weight itself had changed meaning. "Show me," he said, not as a challenge, as a request. Bruce didn't return to the bar. Instead, he stepped back into open space and asked Arnold to push him. No techniques, no strikes, just raw force. Arnold hesitated, then placed both hands on Bruce's chest and applied pressure the way a strong man naturally does. Forward, linear, controlled. Bruce didn't resist it head-on. His body rotated a fraction, spine aligning, hips settling. The pressure didn't stop, but it no longer belonged to Arnold. It traveled through Bruce into the floor, dispersed, neutralized. Arnold pushed harder. Bruce remained where he was, not braced, not stiff, simply present. "Again," Bruce said. This time Arnold committed. Full strength, the kind of force that normally sent men backward or forced them to lock joints to survive it. Bruce moved less, not more. Arnold felt it instantly, not failure, but confusion. His own strength was working against him, feeding into something that refused to meet it directly. When Bruce stepped aside and let the force pass, Arnold nearly stumbled forward, catching himself just in time. No throw, no technique anyone could name, just inevitability. Bruce spoke quietly so only Arnold could hear. "When you push, you tense. Tension announces intention. When I move, I don't tense first, I arrive." Arnold straightened slowly. His breathing had changed, not heavy but deliberate, the way it gets when a man realizes he's standing at the edge of something much larger than himself. "I've trained my body," he said, "but you've trained something else." Bruce nodded. "The nervous system, timing, awareness, how force enters and exits the body." Around them, the gym had resumed movement, but nothing felt the same. Men lifted weights again, but their eyes flicked toward Bruce and Arnold. What they'd witnessed wasn't spectacle. It was unsettling. It suggested that strength alone, visible, measurable strength, was incomplete. Arnold finally smiled, but it wasn't the smile of victory or dominance. It was the smile of a student who had just discovered how little he knew. "I thought strength was about overcoming resistance," he said. Bruce picked up his towel. "That's one way," he replied. "Another is to make resistance irrelevant." Arnold watched him walk away, understanding that what had just happened wouldn't show up in magazines or trophies, but it would stay with him, because for the first time, strength hadn't been louder, bigger, or heavier. It had been quieter, and that silence was heavier than steel. The moment didn't end when Bruce walked away. That was the part most people missed. Strength demonstrations usually finish with applause, laughter, or disbelief. This one finished with silence, the kind that lingers because it forces men to think instead of react. Arnold stayed where he was, eyes following Bruce, not in awe, but in recalibration. He had spent years mastering the language of muscle, learning how to command mass, how to build force through repetition and load. That language had brought him dominance, recognition, certainty, and now, in a matter of seconds, it had been revealed as incomplete. Arnold didn't abandon his training that day. He didn't suddenly reject weights or the discipline that built his body. What changed was subtler and far more dangerous to complacency. He began to notice how he moved between sets, how much tension lived in his shoulders when none was needed, how often effort preceded action instead of arriving with it. He watched how men braced before lifts, how they announced their intentions to gravity itself. And for the first time, he wondered what would happen if effort arrived after alignment, not before. Bruce, meanwhile, treated the encounter as finished, not because it was unimportant, but because his philosophy demanded detachment. Demonstrations were not trophies. They were tools, used when words failed, then set aside. That was always his way. He understood that true impact didn't happen in the moment of shock, but in the slow restructuring that followed inside another person's mind. The steel bar bending wasn't the lesson. The lesson was what broke internally when expectations collapsed. Days later, Arnold returned to the same gym. Same weights, same mirrors, same routines. But his questions were different now. He asked about balance, about grip, about tension in the hands, about why certain fighters felt impossible to read even when they were smaller. Conversations changed tone. Where once numbers dominated, reps, sets, pounds, now concepts entered the room. Timing, transfer, efficiency. Men who had never questioned their strength began to notice its limitations. Bruce never positioned himself as an alternative to strength. That misunderstanding followed him his entire life. He didn't reject power, he refined it. He didn't oppose muscle, he subordinated it to intelligence. To him, strength without control was noise. Power without awareness was waste. He trained not to be stronger than others, but to be earlier than them. Earlier in perception, earlier in reaction, earlier in decision. By the time force appeared, he had already moved. That philosophy extended beyond combat. It shaped how he approached life, conflict, pressure, even fame. Bruce understood something most people learn too late. Effort applied at the wrong moment costs more than patience ever will. He trained his body to obey intent without delay, to remove friction between thought and action. That was why his movements looked unreal. They weren't faster in the way machines are fast. They were faster because nothing unnecessary stood in the way. Arnold carried that realization into his own evolution. Years later, when people asked him about strength, real strength, he spoke less about numbers and more about control, about understanding leverage, about knowing when to apply force and when to let momentum collapse on its own. The seed planted that day didn't replace his path. It deepened it. It added layers where there had once been only surface. The steel bar returned to its place. The gym returned to noise. Life continued, but something irreversible had happened. A boundary had been crossed, not between men, but between ideas. The belief that strength must always look like strain had been dismantled, quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. And that was Bruce Lee's true signature. Not domination, not spectacle, but the ability to rewrite limits without raising his voice. What most people never understand about that day is that nothing extraordinary happened in the way they expect extraordinary things to happen. No shouting, no challenge thrown across the room, no moment where Bruce Lee proved himself in a way that satisfied the ego of spectators. That misunderstanding is exactly why the lesson cuts deeper the longer you sit with it. Because what unfolded wasn't a feat of strength. It was an exposure of misunderstanding. A misunderstanding so common that entire cultures build their idea of power around it. Arnold Schwarzenegger represented the absolute pinnacle of visible strength. His body was the result of relentless discipline, sacrifice, precision, and obsession. There was nothing fake about it, no illusion, no shortcuts. And that is precisely why the moment mattered. Bruce wasn't revealing a flaw in Arnold. He was revealing a flaw in the definition of strength itself. The assumption that force must always announce itself, that effort must always be visible, that power must always look heavy, loud, and exhausting. Bruce understood something most people never train long enough to experience. Force does not originate in muscle. Muscle only expresses force. The origin lies deeper, in structure, timing, nervous system coordination, and the ability to remain relaxed under pressure. Where most men train to apply power, Bruce trained to receive it, redirect it, and decide where it would go next. That difference changes everything. This is why his movements unsettled people. They violated intuition. They looked wrong, too calm, too small, too economical. Human beings are conditioned to associate effort with effectiveness. When effort disappears but effectiveness remains, the mind struggles to reconcile what it's seeing. That discomfort is not confusion, it's growth knocking at the door. Arnold didn't walk away diminished. He walked away sharpened. The encounter didn't challenge his identity as a strong man. It expanded it. It introduced the idea that strength could exist without strain, that control could outweigh mass, that efficiency could outperform excess. These weren't ideas Bruce invented in that gym. They were ideas he embodied everywhere he went. The gym was just another place where physics met philosophy. Bruce never tried to convert people. He didn't preach, he demonstrated. And once the demonstration was complete, he moved on. That was his discipline. To him, obsession with validation was weakness. The moment had served its purpose. The seed had been planted. What grew afterward was out of his hands. Years later, people would argue endlessly about Bruce Lee, about whether stories were exaggerated, about whether feats were possible, about whether moments like this really happened. Those arguments miss the point entirely, because the truth of Bruce Lee was never about individual moments. It was about consistency. The same principle showed up everywhere, on film sets, in dojos, in private training, in quiet conversations, in brief demonstrations that left lasting consequences. Strength that relies on size fades. Strength that relies on speed ages. Strength that relies on alignment endures. Bruce trained for what remained when youth disappeared, when speed slowed, when brute force failed. He trained the part of the human being that adapts when conditions change. That is why his philosophy survived him. That is why decades later, fighters, athletes, coaches, and thinkers still return to the same ideas, dressed in different language, but pointing to the same truth. Arnold went on to conquer worlds Bruce never cared about. Stages, screens, politics. Bruce went on to become something rarer, a reference point. A benchmark not of dominance, but of understanding. The kind of understanding that doesn't age, because it isn't tied to a body type, a weight class, or an era. That steel bar bending was insignificant on its own. What bent that day was certainty. And once certainty bends, it never returns to its original shape. That is how history is actually made, not through noise, but through moments so quiet they force you to listen to yourself.